The theater hummed with a life of its own, a vibrating anticipation that clung to the air like the heavy scent of roses in the lobby. Hundreds of people sat in red velvet seats, some whispering excitedly, others fanning themselves with glossy programs, while the golden glow of chandeliers reflected like distant stars on polished wooden floors. Backstage, the world was a different kind of chaos. An orchestra of nervous whispers, creaking floorboards, and the sharp scent of hairspray and stage makeup. Alicia Stevens clutched the edges of her white thrift store dress, the fabric rough and uneven against her small, trembling fingers. It was too big in some places, too tight in others, but she had ironed every crease herself the night before, determined that she would not let her mother see anything less than perfection. Vivian knelt beside her daughter, smoothing the skirt with hands that shook from months of chemotherapy. Her hair, once golden and soft, now lay limp against her cheeks, dull from exhaustion and illness, yet her eyes burned with a fierce, unwavering love. "You're ready," she whispered, her voice soft but steady, a fragile anchor in the storm of Alicia's nerves. Alicia nodded, taking a deep, shaky breath. She could feel the warmth of the stage lights just beyond the curtain, a small sun waiting to spotlight every ounce of courage she possessed. Alicia's eyes wandered toward the dimly lit wings of the stage, catching glimpses of other children, their smiles nervous, some bouncing on the balls of their feet. Yet none of them carried the same quiet fire that Alicia had learned to nurture since her mother fell ill. She had learned responsibility in ways most children her age never understood, counting pills, making peanut butter sandwiches, holding back tears so her mother could rest, keeping a gentle voice even when fear crept in. Tonight, all that effort, all that hope, rested in her small hands and her shaky voice. "Mommy," she whispered, leaning close, her forehead brushing against Vivian's. "I'm going to win, I promise. I'll get the money and you'll be completely better. Maybe we can even have a house with a garden and flowers like we used to plant." Her words were tender but brimming with determination, a promise carved out of a child's love and fierce sense of duty. Vivian felt the sting of tears behind her eyes but refused to let them fall. She kissed Alicia's temple, pressing her lips against the cool cheek that still held the softness of childhood, and whispered back, "I know you will, my darling. Sing from your heart." Beyond the curtain, the audience's murmurs swelled into a low hum of excitement. The spotlighted stage gleamed like polished marble, its backdrop emblazoned with the logos of the event's sponsors, a reminder of the world beyond their small, fragile bubble. Among the VIPs in the front row, a man in a tailored Armani suit checked his platinum Rolex for the fourth time in as many minutes, his attention divided between his phone and the unfolding spectacle. Gary Vermont, CEO of a billion-dollar empire, sat with the air of a man who had long since mastered control over every aspect of his life, unaware that tonight, control would slip through his fingers in the most unexpected way. Alicia could hear the faint click of heels on the aisle as the announcer prepared to call her name. Her small chest rose and fell with rapid breaths, each inhalation tinged with anticipation and fear. Her tiny hands gripped the microphone stand, knuckles white as she whispered once more to herself, "For Mommy, I can do this." The curtain rustled as she stepped forward, the warmth of the lights washing over her like a gentle tide. Every nervous flutter in her stomach, every whisper of fear, melted away under the weight of love and determination that had guided her steps this far. Tonight the spotlight beckoned and Alicia Stevens was ready to answer its call. The auditorium trembled with a quiet electricity, the kind that made the skin tingle and the pulse quicken. From backstage, Alicia could hear the low murmur of the audience swelling into laughter, applause, and whispers of anticipation. Each sound was a tiny heartbeat of the theater, counting down to her moment. She pressed her small hands to her chest, feeling her own racing heartbeat echo back. The microphone in front of her looked enormous, its cold metal surface reflecting the stage lights like 1,000 distant suns. But she straightened her shoulders, lifted her chin, and remembered her mother's voice, soft but firm. "Sing from your heart, Alicia. Let it flow like a stream." Vivian knelt beside her daughter, smoothing the hem of the white dress for what seemed like the 100th time. Her hands were worn, trembling not just from exhaustion but from the years of struggle, the chemotherapy that had hollowed her once strong arms, the long nights spent balancing work, hospital bills, and the impossible hope that she would see her child grow up. "You're going to make me proud tonight," she whispered, her lips brushing Alicia's forehead. There was no false cheer in her voice, no sugar-coated promises, just a steady, unwavering conviction that gave Alicia a courage she had never known she possessed. Across the theater, the VIP section glittered with wealth and indifference. Gary Vermont, polished and precise in his Armani suit, leaned back in his chair, his platinum Rolex catching the overhead light. The CEO of a sprawling tech empire that touched the lives of millions was a man whose decisions shaped industries, whose name could make or break fortunes overnight. Yet here he sat, in a child-filled auditorium, surrounded by the mundane applause of strangers, calculating every tick of the clock as lost productivity. He barely noticed the chatter of parents, the nervous fidgeting of other contestants, until Alicia inhaled sharply and began to hum the opening notes of her song. At first, it was just a fragile murmur, a tentative flow of melody that barely reached the audience, but even in its early trembling form, the tune carried something hauntingly familiar. Gary's hand poised above his phone froze. Something deep inside him stirred, a memory he had buried under years of contracts, meetings, and cold efficiency. The notes teased a recollection he couldn't yet name, a song he had written 8 years ago with a woman who had vanished from his life without warning. Backstage, Vivian squeezed Alicia's shoulder. "Keep going, sweetheart. Don't stop." The encouragement was gentle, almost desperate, as if she knew every word, every note carried the weight of their fragile world. Alicia's eyes glistened in the dim backstage light. She felt the invisible tug of hope, the sharp urgency of her mission. This was not just a performance. It was a lifeline. Every phrase she sang, every breath she took, was dedicated to the sick mother who had given her everything. On stage, Alicia's voice strengthened, flowing with a purity and power that belied her 7 years. The notes rose and fell like a tide, filling the auditorium, slipping past the polite applause and catching the attention of every listener. Gary's eyes widened, his analytical mind scrambling, his heart hammering in disbelief. This voice, these phrasing, this song, it was impossible. It could not be real. Yet each note confirmed it. Each word, each rise and fall, carried an intimacy he would have recognized anywhere, even after 8 years. Vivian, oblivious to the man in the front row, watched her daughter with a mix of awe and fear. She did not know that the song Alicia was singing was the very same one Gary had composed, the song he had written for her, Vivian, years ago. She did not know that the eyes she loved and nurtured were reflecting a hidden truth, a secret about to unravel the world of 3 hearts that had been shattered and scattered for nearly a decade. As Alicia's voice soared, a silence fell over the theater. It was the kind of silence that stretches, heavy with expectation, a pause before revelation. Every eye turned, every breath held, every mind caught between disbelief and wonder. Gary's hands gripped the arms of his chair, white-knuckled as tears pricked the corners of his eyes. He could not move. He could not speak. All he could do was watch, frozen, as the girl, his daughter, continued to sing, weaving together the past and the present, the pain and the hope into a single, impossible moment. Backstage, Alicia felt a strange vibration in the air, a tension she could not name. Something was happening beyond her understanding, a gravity she could not see but could feel, and somewhere deep inside Vivian's heart, already fragile and worn, fluttered with the same unspoken question. Could this song, this one extraordinary song, be the key to saving everything they had lost, and perhaps everything they still had a chance to find? The stage lights pressed down like molten gold, washing Alicia Stevens in warmth that was almost blinding, a stark contrast to the shadowed chaos backstage. Her small hands gripped the microphone with a strength born of necessity, her tiny knuckles whitening against the metal as though she were holding the weight of the world itself. Each breath she took was measured, deliberate, a quiet defiance against the storm of nerves and fear that threatened to pull her under. She could hear the audience settling into a hush, the low rustle of programs, the whisper of anticipation that tickled the edges of her consciousness. This was no longer a simple talent show. This was a battleground where hope, desperation, and love collided. From the front row, Gary Vermont leaned forward ever so slightly, the platinum gleam of his watch catching the stage lights and scattering tiny shards of rainbow across the polished floor. He could not look away. The sound of Alicia's voice reached him first as a fragile thread of melody, then wove into a tapestry of emotion so vivid and piercing it made his chest ache. Every note pulled at something long buried, a memory wrapped in the scent of sunlit mornings, laughter echoing across quiet rooms, and promises whispered in the dark. It was the song he had composed 8 years ago for a woman he had loved more than life itself, Vivian, the one who had vanished without warning, leaving a note that had shattered him into pieces he had spent years trying to glue back together. Backstage, Vivian held her daughter's elbow lightly, encouraging without words, whispering only with the subtlest squeeze. Her own heart was a fragile thing, beating unevenly with a mix of pride, fear, and unspoken longing. She could feel every note Alicia sang vibrating through her, carrying a weight that neither of them could fully comprehend yet. This was more than performance. This was survival, and somewhere beneath it all, Alicia sensed it, the urgency, the sacredness of the moment, though she did not yet understand why. As Alicia's song swelled, the auditorium seemed to fall into a spellbound silence. The other contestants, the parents, even the janitor sweeping near the side exits, all fell away, leaving only the girl, her mother, and the man who had no idea that the song unfolding before him was written for him, sung now by his own daughter. Gary's breath caught in his throat, unsteady for the first time in decades. His mind, accustomed to contracts, spreadsheets, and mergers worth millions, scrambled to process what was impossible. Each chord, each delicate rise in pitch, bore the unmistakable signature of his own creation. This was his song, but no one else in the world knew it. Not even her mother, not even the people around him. His pulse thrummed like a drum, echoing the rhythm of the melody. Memories crashed against the walls of his mind, the laughter of Vivian, her bright hair spilling across sunlit lawns, the hope they had shared for a future together that had been stolen away in an instant. And now, standing under the golden spotlight, was a child who seemed to carry that past, that lost love in her voice, in the tilt of her head, in the way her eyes glimmered when she hit the high notes. It was impossible, yet undeniable. Backstage, Vivian's breath caught, a fleeting sense of unease brushing against her motherly instincts. Something had shifted in the air, subtle but undeniable, a tension that made her stomach twist, a weight she could not name. Alicia continued to sing, unaware of the storm she had already begun to unleash, her voice rippling with purity and power, carrying a promise she could not yet fully articulate, that she would protect her mother, that she would fight for love and life with every note. Gary's hands tightened around the arms of his chair, white-knuckled. He could not leave, could not look away. It was as if the past had reached through time and space to confront him in this small auditorium, through the voice of a child he had never met. Each note struck him like a lightning bolt, intense, piercing, impossible to ignore. The melody wrapped around his chest, squeezing, demanding recognition. His lips parted, but no sound came. He was frozen, suspended between disbelief and revelation, the world narrowing to the small girl on the stage who held the key to everything he thought he had lost. And then, as Alicia hit the final note of the prelude, a shiver ran down Gary's spine. There it was, the unmistakable, fragile, haunting timbre of a voice that could belong to no one but his own child. The realization was sudden, violent, and overwhelming. He could feel the years of absence, the pain, the loss, all collapsing into a single breathless moment. The impossible truth struck him full force. This girl, the tiny, trembling figure under the spotlight, was the living, breathing bridge between the past he thought he had buried and the future he had no idea he could still have. Backstage, Vivian still watched her daughter, blissfully unaware of the storm she had already stirred, of the man in the front row whose life was about to unravel and rebuild in ways she could not yet imagine. Alicia's song hung in the air, suspended between reality and miracle, between loss and reunion, carrying within it the first flickers of hope for a family torn apart and a father who would never be the same again. The final chord of Alicia's opening melody reverberated through the auditorium like a living pulse, vibrating against the walls, the ceiling, even the polished wooden floor beneath the seats. For a heartbeat, the entire theater seemed suspended in a fragile, sacred silence, as if the universe itself had leaned in to listen. And then came the high notes, soaring and piercing, each one trembling with emotion yet unwavering in precision, a voice that carried a depth far beyond her 7 years. It was in that moment that Gary Vermont's mind, usually so precise and unshakable, finally cracked. He felt it first in his chest, a sharp, searing recognition that stole his breath and made the platinum watch on his wrist feel like a worthless trinket. The melody, the phrasing, the subtle pauses, the delicate vibrato, they were his. Every nuance of that song had been written in the quiet hours of love and loss, a gift for Vivian, for the life they had dreamed of together, now sung by a child he had never known existed. His eyes widened, moisture glinting at the corners, and he gripped the arms of his chair until the leather groaned. How could this be real? How could she know the song? How could it exist anywhere beyond the pages he had carefully hidden? Beyond the memory of a woman who had left him 8 years ago without a trace. Backstage, Vivian felt a strange pull in the air, a weight she could not identify. Alicia's small chest rose and fell as she sang, and the warmth of the stage lights cast a halo around her golden blonde hair, making her seem ethereal, untouchable. Vivian's lips quivered. She had no idea the song she had encouraged her daughter to perform was the very one that had defined Gary Vermont's world, the song that had been buried in the ruins of a love lost too soon. And yet somewhere deep in the theater, fate was rearranging itself, and neither mother nor child was aware of how close their lives were to colliding with the past. Gary's breaths came in shallow, jagged bursts. Memories he had locked away in the deepest chambers of his heart surged forward in a torrent. The laughter of a sunlit morning with Vivian, the scent of flowers she had tucked into her hair, the tender way she had always reached for his hand when the world seemed too cruel. He saw her face vibrant and alive, and then the note she had left, crumpled in his palm for years, whispering the cruel, incomprehensible goodbye that had shattered his life. And now, impossibly miraculously, he heard their song again, carried in the voice of a child whose tiny body could not possibly hold the weight of such history. The audience was oblivious to the storm unfolding in the front row. They clapped politely for the other contestants, murmured encouragement, laughed at small jokes, unaware that the very seat they occupied contained a man whose heart was unraveling. A man whose life, carefully measured and meticulously controlled, was being pulled apart by a single unexpected chord. Gary's mind raced. It can't be. She's too young. It's impossible, and yet, Alicia tilted her head as she reached the high crescendo, her voice trembling just enough to pierce the soul, yet commanding enough to fill the room with a force that no one could ignore. In that instant, Gary realized something that made his knees nearly buckle. The girl, the voice, the song, they were pieces of his lost past, pieces of a life he had thought irretrievably gone. And buried beneath that recognition, deeper than shock or disbelief, rose a force more powerful than anything he had felt in years. Hope. A fierce, undeniable hope that maybe, just maybe, the impossible could be true. Backstage, Vivian watched Alicia with pride so sharp it hurt, unaware that she was watching her daughter sing to her father, a man who had been a stranger until tonight but whose blood ran in the same veins, whose love had shaped the melody Alicia carried in her heart. Alicia's eyes sparkled in the stage lights, oblivious to the invisible thread connecting her song to a past neither she nor her mother fully understood. And in the front row, Gary's tears fell freely now, hot and bitter, each one a confession, a reckoning, a release. Time seemed to bend. The final note lingered in the theater like a suspended heartbeat, vibrating in the air, in the floorboards, in the soul of everyone who had the privilege to hear it. Gary's hands, once firm and commanding, now shook uncontrollably. He stood abruptly, the chair scraping across the floor, and the sudden movement drew murmurs from the audience. His eyes were locked on Alicia, and for the first time in 8 long years the world made a cruel, breathtaking sense. The child, the song, the woman he had loved and lost, everything he had thought gone forever was converging in a single, impossible moment. And in that charged silence, the first thought formed in his mind, sharp and undeniable. That girl, she's mine. The final notes of Alicia's song hung in the air, shimmering like fragile glass on the edge of breaking. The auditorium was silent, as if every heart had collectively held its breath, waiting for the fragile echo of the impossible. Alicia, small and trembling, lowered the microphone with hands that shook for more than nerves. This was the culmination of all her hope, all her love, all her quiet, persistent courage. Every syllable had been a prayer, every vibration of her voice a plea for her mother's health. A declaration that she would fight, that she would endure, that she would do whatever it took to protect the one person who mattered most. In the front row, Gary Vermont was frozen, his chair still scraping faintly across the polished floor. He could barely process what he was seeing. His eyes, usually cold and calculating, were wide with disbelief, glistening with unshed tears that mirrored the ache of years he thought had been wasted. Each note had drawn him deeper into a labyrinth of memory and longing, each phrasing pulling at threads of a life he had tried to forget. And yet it was all there in front of him, in the form of a child who could not possibly be more than 7, singing with a voice that was unmistakably, impossibly his own creation, and hauntingly reminiscent of Vivian's. The world narrowed to that single point of impossible recognition. Gary's pulse thudded in his ears, each beat a drum of urgency, each inhalation a struggle between disbelief and dawning truth. He could see it in her eyes, those cornflower blue eyes, the tilt of her head as she hit the high notes, the precision and passion that mirrored his own composition so perfectly it defied explanation. This was more than uncanny talent. This was destiny rendered in melody. And suddenly all the careful control, all the walls he had built around himself, all the cold precision of a life spent calculating profits and acquisitions, fell away like dust in sunlight. Backstage, Vivian knelt beside Alicia, smoothing down the folds of the dress one last time, her hands trembling with exhaustion and anticipation. She had no idea that in the front row, a man she had once loved and thought lost forever was sitting, captivated, heart in hand, recognizing the song he had written for her, and for the life they had dreamed of together. Every word her daughter sang was an unseen bridge, linking past to present, the lost to the found, the broken to the hopeful. Alicia had no inkling that her voice was unraveling a secret that had been buried for years, that each note carried the weight of history, heartbreak, and reunion yet to come. The audience erupted in applause, a thunderclap that seemed to shake the walls, but Gary barely noticed. His gaze was locked on Alicia, on the way her small form shone under the spotlight, and on the invisible thread connecting them. His chest ached as memories flooded him. Vivian's laughter spilling across sunlit mornings, the tender intimacy of their shared song, the final note he had never dared play again after she left. And now here she was, not the woman he had loved, but their child, singing a song that carried the weight of his soul and hers in a single, impossible moment. Something deep within Gary stirred, a force he could not name, a trembling recognition that surged through every nerve ending. He rose abruptly, the chair scraping loudly, drawing murmurs of curiosity from nearby attendees. Every instinct screamed at him to move forward, to reach for the truth that stood just beyond reach. His lips parted, but words failed him, swallowed by emotion so raw it nearly incapacitated him. All he could do was watch, unblinking. As Alicia's voice tapered, quivering yet steadfast, the echo of her final notes resonating with a power that seemed to pause the world itself. Vivian's heart leapt in her chest, sensing an invisible shift, a gravity she could not yet understand. There was something in the air, a tension that thrummed against her skin, a pull toward something monumental and inevitable. She did not yet know the truth. She did not know that the man sitting in the front row, overwhelmed and silent, was the father her daughter had never met. The father whose absence had left a hole in their lives that no amount of hope or courage could fully fill. And in that charged, almost holy moment, Gary finally knew without a doubt. The child on stage, the song she had sung with such purity and force, the unmistakable echo of the melody he had written years ago. Alicia Stevens was his daughter. His chest tightened with disbelief, awe, and a flood of emotions that no amount of power or money could control. He could feel the years of separation, the pain, and the longing compressing into a single point of clarity. Everything he thought he had lost, the life, the love, the family, was standing before him in the glow of the spotlight, fragile, trembling, but alive. And just like that, the impossible became inevitable. The applause still echoed in the theater like distant thunder, but to Gary Vermont it was nothing more than a hollow background noise. His entire world had contracted to the small figure on the stage, a girl no more than 7, whose voice carried not only the melody he had written 8 years ago, but the unmistakable weight of his lost love, his broken past, and the future he had never dared to imagine. He stood rooted to the floor, white-knuckled hands gripping the back of his chair, heart hammering in a rhythm that made the polished auditorium feel like it was tilting beneath him. Every instinct he had ever relied on, logic, calculation, control, had evaporated in an instant, leaving only raw, irrepressible truth. That girl, that song was his. Backstage, Alicia's tiny body was trembling with relief and exhaustion, her chest heaving as she released the final note. Vivian knelt beside her, smoothing down the folds of the white dress, her hands shaking not from fear but from the intensity of pride and love. She smiled through her own exhaustion, whispering, "You did it, baby. You were amazing." But even as she spoke, a faint pull tugged at her heart, a subtle tension that she could not place. Something had shifted in the air, a presence she could not yet identify. Gary moved almost without thinking, each step deliberate yet trembling, as if walking through air thickened by fate itself. Every eye in the front row followed him, whispering, curious, sensing some hidden drama, but none of them understood the magnitude of what was unfolding. The theater lights reflected off his platinum watch, casting tiny rainbows across the aisle, but he saw none of it. He saw only the girl who held the missing piece of a life he had long thought lost. As he approached the stage, Alicia's gaze lifted, innocent and wide, unaware of the man moving toward her with a mixture of awe, disbelief, and overwhelming love. Vivian's pulse quickened as she noticed the unfamiliar figure stepping closer, a presence charged with authority and something unspoken, a force that seemed to shift the very atmosphere backstage. Her motherly instincts flared, a mixture of protectiveness and uncertainty. "Mommy," Alicia whispered, sensing the intensity in the man's approach. She clutched the microphone tighter, her voice dropping to a cautious murmur. Something in his eyes, the raw, unguarded vulnerability, made her small chest tighten. Gary finally stopped just a few feet away, bending slightly to meet her gaze. His voice was hoarse, broken by disbelief, yet firm in its sincerity. "Alicia, is it really you?" The words were not a question but a lifeline, a desperate hope voiced aloud. Vivian's breath caught. The man's eyes, the same eyes that had haunted her dreams, the eyes that had once held a love so deep she had thought impossible to forget, were locked on her daughter. Recognition sparked, and in an instant the past collided violently with the present. Gary's lips trembled as he extended a tentative hand, not to take, but to reach, to connect, to bridge 8 years of absence and pain. Alicia's small hand lifted, hesitant, then slowly reached toward him. In that simple motion, the first physical connection, they both understood something that words could never fully express. Gary's chest tightened, the tears streaming down his face uncontrolled, as if each drop carried 8 years of longing, loss, and regret. Vivian finally understood, her knees weakening as the impossible truth settled over her. This man, the stranger she had loved and lost, was standing before them, and he was the father of her child. The theater, oblivious to the intimate drama unfolding on stage and in the wings, erupted into applause again, unaware that the real performance had nothing to do with talent or music. This was a reunion of fractured hearts, a collision of lost time and stolen years, a moment that had been years in the making yet appeared instantaneous. Gary knelt slightly, bringing himself to Alicia's level, his voice soft, trembling, reverent. I'm your father," he whispered. Alicia's eyes widened in understanding and recognition, though she did not fully comprehend the scope of it. Vivian, caught between shock and relief, stepped forward, her hand lightly brushing his arm. For the first time in years, the three of them, mother, daughter, and father, stood in the same space, hearts trembling, fragile and raw, poised on the precipice of reconciliation. The silence that followed was deafening, not because of absence, but because the weight of what had just occurred pressed down with such intensity that it stole the very air from the room, every heartbeat in tandem with the truth that had been revealed. The past, once lost, had returned, and it had returned in the purest, most unexpected form imaginable. Gary looked at Vivian, then at Alicia, and a rare, vulnerable smile cracked across his face, one born of awe, love, and the impossibility of what had just been revealed. "I don't know how this happened, or how I missed it all these years," he admitted, voice breaking, "but I promise we'll figure it out, together." Vivian's tears flowed freely now, mingling grief, relief, and hope as Alicia squeezed his hand and whispered, "I knew you'd come." It was a simple statement, yet its weight was monumental. In that one moment, 8 years of pain, absence, and unanswered questions began to unravel, and the possibility of a family reunited, a family healed, blazed brighter than the stage lights, more powerful than any song, more impossible to ignore than the truth itself. The theater lights seemed to dim, though the stage still glowed with the residual warmth of Alicia's final notes. Time itself had slowed, each second stretching into eternity as if the universe were holding its breath, waiting for the impossible to fully reveal itself. Gary Vermont stood frozen for a moment, his hand still lightly clasping Alicia's small one, the weight of reality pressing down with almost unbearable force. The man who had built empires, negotiated billions, and controlled every outcome of his meticulously planned life had nothing in his grasp now, except the trembling, irreplaceable fragment of his heart that had returned in the form of a 7-year-old child. Vivian's knees threatened to buckle beneath her. Her eyes, wide and glistening, darted between her daughter and the man who now seemed impossibly connected to both of them. Memories once dulled by time and pain surged through her. Laughter shared in sunlit fields whispered promises of love, the aching emptiness after his absence. And now, after all these years, that emptiness was being filled slowly, tenderly, by the impossible reunion unfolding in front of her eyes. Alicia, sensing the magnitude of the moment even without fully understanding it, squeezed Gary's hand tighter. "You're my daddy," she whispered, her voice small but steady, trembling only with the awe of revelation. The word hung in the air like a fragile promise, a bridge between the past and the present, a lifeline thrown across years of separation. Gary's throat tightened, and for the first time in decades he found words inadequate. His voice, when it came, was a hoarse whisper, thick with emotion. Yes, Alicia. I am your father." Alicia's eyes widened, a mixture of disbelief and wonder, and she looked to her mother for confirmation. Vivian stepped closer, tears spilling freely down her face, her hand brushing Gary's arm in silent acknowledgement. "It's true," she said, her voice trembling yet steady, carrying the weight of every year they had been apart. "He's your father." The crowd around them, oblivious to the private revelation, continued to applaud the performance, unaware that the real drama, the one that had been 8 years in the making, was occurring just a few feet away. Gary knelt to meet Alicia at eye level, his large, strong hands trembling as they cupped her small face. The moment was electric, charged with a force that no stage lights, no applause, no worldly power could ever match. "I don't know how I missed you," he murmured, voice cracking. "How I let years slip by without finding you. Without knowing. But I promise I will never let you go again." Alicia's small arms reached up instinctively, wrapping around his neck with a trust and love so pure it seemed to illuminate the entire theater. Vivian's heart ached with a mixture of relief and joy, her hands moving to embrace them both. In that embrace, the father, the mother, the daughter, the fractured pieces of a family began to stitch themselves back together. The years of absence, the silent suffering, the unanswered questions, all of it condensed into this single, impossible, perfect moment of reunion. Gary's eyes glistened as he looked at Vivian, searching for answers in the lines of her face, in the color of her eyes, in the trembling of her hands. "I never stopped loving you," he admitted, voice barely above a whisper, though the intensity of it filled the space between them. Vivian, caught between disbelief and hope, allowed herself to finally release the torrent of emotion she had held back for so long. "And I never stopped hoping," she said, her words breaking through the weight of years, "that you would come back to us." For a long moment, the world outside their embrace ceased to exist. The theater, the audience, the talent show all faded into insignificance. Time had bent, twisted, and finally unraveled to allow this impossible truth to surface. A child's song, sung with innocence and courage, had shattered the barriers of lost time and opened a doorway to healing, love, and reunion. Finally, Gary lifted his gaze to Alicia, a new kind of determination burning in his eyes, tempered with tenderness and awe. "We have so much to catch up on. So many years to fill," he said, voice firm yet trembling with vulnerability. Alicia nodded solemnly, a tiny smile breaking through the awe on her face. "We can do it together," she whispered. Vivian stepped back slightly, her eyes meeting Gary's, the unspoken understanding passing between them like a spark that ignited years of hope. The impossible had happened. The child who had sung for her sick mother had unknowingly orchestrated a miracle that no one, not even the universe itself, could have predicted. And in that suspended, perfect moment, the three of them, father, mother, daughter, stood as one, their hearts beating together for the first time in 8 long, agonizing years. The past had collided with the present, The secrets had unraveled, and a family thought lost forever had been found, stitched together by love, courage, and a song that refused to be silenced. Outside, the audience erupted into applause once more, but it was no longer important. The real music, the music of hearts reconnecting, of lives intertwining, of love resurrected, was happening here, in the golden glow of the stage, in the quiet, powerful, unspoken spaces between father, mother, and child. And for the first time in years, all three of them allowed themselves to believe that perhaps, just perhaps, everything broken could be made whole again.